Hello, and welcome to the fifth learning module for EMR502, Reading in the Curriculum. Today we're going to be looking at models for organizing multiple texts, how to work with multiple texts, and how we can bring texts into conversation with each other. So today's goals, we're going to go over a curricular model that allows for purposeful use of text sets. Your reading over the next 2 weeks is going to be to read teaching with the text sets. And all of this is hopefully to help you to prepare for your planning assignment, to think about what you might do for your planning assignment. Okay, so what I wanted to do very quickly is, this is a graphic from our reading teaching with text sets, and I just kind of wanted to go over text sets and how text sets can really be multi-genre text sets. And when we're talking about multi-genre, we're talking about different types of texts. So we might have informational text, we might have literary text, we might have imaginative text, we might have realistic texts, we might have traditional text, we might have visual or auditory text. And so these are all things that, that I want you to think about, because it's really key that we think about the different ways that we can bring a student to the process of making meaning to, in our texts, okay? So this is beyond decoding. This is really looking at how to get them into the comprehension level. And one of the things I want you to think about, especially when we are talking about students that might be still on, struggling a little bit with the decoding, the value of a visual text, or maybe an something that's a combination multimodal text might have, because our brain is really wired to take in visual information. We learn so much more of visually than we do using any of our other senses. And so it becomes really important for us to think about maybe using some type of visual cues to help our students to understand something that we're reading in our curriculum. Before I get into the curricular model that I'm about to go over, I wanted to just very quickly go over Louis Rosenblatt's theory of transactional theory of reading, which is really key to the whole thing. And the transactional theory of reading, as you probably are aware, is sort of the belief that it's the transaction between the reader and the text that is where the important learning, the comprehension happens. The comprehension, we bring something to the text brings something to us, and it's in that transaction and in that sort of where we're reconciling what we know or think we know with the text, with what the text is saying. Does it affirm us? Does it challenge us? Does it offer something new? That's really where the key learning and comprehension happens. And so what we want to think about when we are, when we're doing this with a really important piece of text that's in our curriculum, are there other texts that can go into this conversation to help our student to make meaning with the text that we're bringing to them as part of our curriculum? The curriculum model that I'm about to go over, I actually came upon when I was a teacher leader, when the Common Core state standards were new, and I was working as a department chair at a Catholic high school. We were trying to figure out, how do we were in the midst of mapping to try to align with state standards. It's a small school. We don't have the kind of district support. So we took a webinar, and then read this book called Supporting Students in a Time of the Common Core. And while this is about ELA, and it is specifically about high school ELA, I think the model that she presents has value, because what it does is it offers us an idea, sort of a language to think about. Why do I want to pair these two texts together? And when I use the word text, I want to make it very, very clear that I do not just mean traditional texts. I can be talking about an entire movie. I could be talking about a clip from a movie. I could be talking about a speech. I could be talking about a photograph. I could be talking about a song. So, think very broadly when I use the term text. But in this curricular model, what we have are three components, and they kind of work together. One of the terms is fulcrum, and a fulcrum, if you know anything about how gears work, it's sort of the tipping point. It's where everything is balanced off of. And so I'll go over these in a little bit more detail, but essentially we have at the center of our planning, we have our theme or our essential question. We have the learning that we want our students to do. You could also, in a content area, you might literally put this as the learning objective. What's the content learning objective that I might have? And then what we have are 3 kinds of texts. And these 3 different types of texts work together for very specific purposes. The first one is going to be the most familiar for us. The fulcrum text. It's the real point of the unit. Traditionally, this would be the whole class text. This is what you're trying to read with the students now. For some of us, when we're talking about dealing with a lot of short text because we are working with young students, perhaps rather than fulcrum text, we might be thinking about it in terms of a fulcrum skill, right? So maybe we're trying to get our students to understand long versus short vowel sounds. And so we can, you're going to adapt this curriculum model. I'm not suggesting that this curriculum model is set in stone, that it's, you can pick it up and use it everywhere, but I'm offering it as kind of an idea to think about what are the purposes of the various texts that I might bring together in my planning. All right. So in this, complexity really matters. This is where we need to go to the standards. We need to understand how rigorous it is. We want to be able to look at things like text complexity, the qualitative and the quantitative measures for it. We want to think about, is this building off what has already been learned? Are we continuing to move our students forward? Those kinds of questions. See, these are really important curricular questions. One of the things I will caution you, though, is if you go to a model like this, you're probably going to get less fulcrum text done in a quarter or a year because you're going to spend a lot more time with those fulcrum texts. So one of the things I found was if I'm going to adapt this kind of model of text sets in my planning, then I really want to be really more purposeful than ever about what I'm going to choose as my fulcrum text. So then I'm going to add what Sarah Wesley Brown, who is the author of the book, she was like the teacher of the year, and I think it was 2010. Brilliant teacher. But what she talks about is calls them context texts. These texts are the way in. They're accessible texts for a student's reading level. We don't want to complicate them here. We want them to be able to pick this up to feel very at ease. They are a way for the students to build prior knowledge. Remember, we have that challenge in content area literacy that background knowledge we know is needed for reading comprehension, is an essential part of reading comprehension, but they're also building their background knowledge by reading. And so this is one of those ways to maybe get that going. And it gives context the complexity of the further reading. These are generally short. They kind of maybe introduce a genre, introduce a topic, give some background knowledge. What I like about these is, traditionally we might do the heavy lifting for our students. Maybe we're going to go over what does the genre look like? Or, I remember teaching units to younger students on the mystery genre. And, this is give them the definitions. This is a red herring. This is this is a central conflict. These are, and so what we do with context text is instead of doing some of these pre-reading strategies that give away the mysteries of the discoveries that are going to come, we have the students do this for themselves. So maybe I'm going to read something in science class that is, that was the work product of, of Marie Curie. Well, now instead of me giving them a little mini lecture on Marie Curie, maybe I give them this pre-reading strategy. Maybe I show them a short 2-minute video biography of her, something like that. And I get them, these are going to be high interest, very accessible text. So these are ones that are trying to grab their attention. The third kind of text that I'm going to put in there, these are challenging ones. They juxtapose the fulcrum text somehow. Maybe they offer a different view. Maybe they come from a totally different time period. It's the relationship. When we go back to that transactional thinking, it's the relationship between the two texts that matters. These can be, I tend to like texture texts that are short. But certainly you could build a unit where they're actually reading two longer works, but the second longer work is there to help to bring it into conversation, to give texture. Interesting fabric texture, it's the contrast, it's the different feels, it's the shades that this might offer. So for instance, as I've mentioned before, I was an English teacher. So, for instance, if I was going to read, when I would read Huck Finn, this is one time when I did use a long work as well. So I would teach Huck Finn. That was my fulcrum text. And there's all kinds of context texts that I would add in to get them ready to read Huck Finn. We would read Huck Finn, but then afterwards, I would read a book by Nancy Rawls that was written sometime in the early 2000s that told the story of Jim Watson, who is the slave that escapes with Huck Finn, tells the story of Jim Watson's bride. And this particular text is told just like a slave narrative was told. Nancy Rawls spent a lot of time reading slave narratives. She did a lot of research on the slave experience. And what it does is it adds a richness to the discussion of Huck Finn, because one of the things we can talk about is, did Mark Twain in Huck Finn recognize the humanity of Jim Watson, the slave, in any meaningful way? Did he talk at all about the experiences and the struggles that Jim might have had as a slave? And so that conversation offered a richness to that text. And so maybe you're looking in a social studies classroom, and maybe you're looking at, the Declaration of Independence. It might be interesting for the students to, when they're reading, when they're looking at the Declaration of Independence, maybe they can also look at something like the Magna Carta, or maybe they can look at Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream, where they can start to look at things differently from a different context, or at least part of that dream, or part of those speeches. These make good text for extended writing activities. We've all seen the AIR test. We know that that extended writing is something that is required of our students, really from the get-go. Beyond second grade, there's this expectation that third and fourth graders are developing extended responses to their reading. They also allow for differentiation. You can give different kinds of context or texture text to your students based on their reading ability, but still have them bring things into conversation. These are really good places to put some very difficult stretch text. So let's say I'm teaching a 5th grade class. This might be a good time to put in a 7th or an 8th grade Lexile reading, and just give them a short excerpt. Just give them maybe a couple of paragraphs to that reading. These really should be complex. Unlike the context texts, these are complex. These challenge our readers in some significant ways. All right. So when you are putting two texts together, we're going to call that a text set. And some of you may choose that as your planning option. Some of you may not, and that's quite okay. I don't want you to sound like you have to. But if you choose to go with the text sets as your planning guide, or even if you don't use that as your strategy for this class, but it's a strategy that you use later, the question that you need to really think about is, what is the relationship between these two texts? Why am I bringing these two texts together? And what is my ultimate learning goal? So you want to really think about that, and how can these two texts bring me that learning goal? All right, well, just a little reminder that you have to continue to work on, I want you to finish reading Teaching with Text Sets if you haven't already done so, and then I want you to work on your planning assignment. And remember that you have to give this planning assignment, so work time into that as well. And let me know if you have any questions. But otherwise, all the dates are on Leo. All the final dates are on Leo for you. And hope that you guys have a good week. Take care.